Hello, hello. Welcome back to the P2P Soap Box. I'm your host and P2P BFF, Marcy Maxwell. Over the last several episodes, I've had the chance to catch up with some of our most in-demand speakers from this year's conference. And today's guests were perhaps the most talked about. So in our little P2P bubble, we talk a good bit about the importance of community and the shared experiences that we bring to life at our events. We know this is what makes peer-to-peer so special and so impactful. However, in an increasingly data-driven world, it has been hard at times to quantify this superpower beyond just immediate dollars raised. And therefore, hard to justify investments and staffing without that clear ROI. But the conversation has started to shift as organizations look at their data beyond just the immediacy of event totals and averages per fundraiser. By examining the larger impact of peer-to-peer participation on a donor's lifetime value, a stat traditionally measured by direct response and in individual giving teams, we can truly begin to understand the long-term impact of our efforts and therefore make that case for even greater investment. Plus, by speaking a common language, we can also break down silos internally and open up our organizations to even greater opportunity. Which brings me to today's guests who represent an organization at the forefront of this effort. I am so happy to be joined by Kevin McMahon and John Thompson of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, commonly known as CHOP. As the nation's first pediatric hospital, and through its long-standing commitment to providing exceptional patient care, training new generations of pediatric healthcare professionals, and pioneering major research initiatives, CHOP has fostered discoveries that have benefited children worldwide. So back to Kevin and John. While Kevin serves as the Senior Director of Peer-to-Peer and Community Fundraising, John is the Associate Vice President of Philanthropic Strategy and Technology, and these two make quite a team. So during our conversation today, we'll dig into how looking at peer-to-peer fundraisers through the lens of lifetime value has shifted their overall philosophy and strategies behind their signature peer-to-peer events. We'll also discuss the tactics it takes to implement a paradigm shift like this, how it impacts their staffing, their performance goals, their budgets. John and Kevin will share what they've learned about the tangible and intangible value of community and how humility has made this work possible. There will definitely be some data points and numbers shared along the way, but don't worry, there's no test. So let's jump right into my conversation with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Kevin McMahon and John Thompson. Kevin, John, welcome to the podcast. So happy to have you.
Thanks, Marcy. It's great to be here.
Marcy, we're humbled, to say the least.
Oh, well, y'all were by far some of the most attention-getting presenters at our recent conference. And so I'm so excited to have y'all on to talk about this really important topic. So before we dive in to talking about lifetime value of our peer-to-peer supporters, I just want to hear a little bit about each of your journeys. So Kevin, I'm going to start with you, and then John, I'll come to you. Can you just tell me a little bit about your kind of personal, professional journey that led you to your respective roles at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia?
Sure. So happy to be a part of today's conversation. So personally, I'm a dad of 3 children, happily married, and love all things leisure sports. So whether it be pickleball or cornhole, everything in between. Professionally, I'm the Senior Director of Peer-to-Peer and Community Fundraising at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, or as we call it, CHOP, not chopped. And I've been at CHOP for about a little over 12 years now. And every single day is different and a new challenge and excitement. And it's really an honor to be able to work alongside so many grateful patient families and the incredible clinical team that is really, truly changing the world.
Awesome. John, what about you?
Well, for my advocation, I'm the AVP of Strategy and Technology over at CHOP. I've been here about 5 years, but I had a long meandering way to get here. I started off in the political world doing foreign policy and game theory, and came back to the States after doing a fellowship in the EU, and wanted to learn soft power and joined my first nonprofit, CARE, to learn that side of things. And I just caught the bug of the nonprofit world, particularly fundraising, which is quite fun. And so from there, I ultimately got on with the Children's Hospital in DC, where I was for a long time. And when my boss got recruited up to CHOP, he brought me with. And so here I am. And then for my profession, I'm married with 2 kids, but my advocation comes kind of first and foremost.
I love it. I love it. I always love hearing how people kind of catch the fundraising bug. So we've got people listening from all over, and not everybody might be familiar with the good work that y'all do at CHOP, but more specifically with how you leverage peer-to-peer fundraising. So Kevin, I want to start with you. Can you just kind of give us that snapshot of what does peer-to-peer look like at CHOP? What are your events, your campaigns, kind of what has this done for your organization?
Yeah, sure. No, happy to. So at CHOP, our peer-to-peer program is primarily broken into 2 categories. So we have 5 peer-to-peer events, which we run, truthfully, soup to nuts, and they benefit a specific area of the hospital, which is fairly different than other hospitals, which are very unrestricted, heavy. So for example, for us, our indoor cycling event, Philly Spin-In, benefits our cardiac center, and our large 10,000 person run walk, the Parkway Run and Walk, benefits our cancer center. We also have a really robust community fundraising program that's broken into 3 verticals: community events and partnerships, virtual and endurance, and school and youth. So under those verticals is kind of there's 15 different revenue lines that range from our endurance program, Team CHOP, to our annual pajama day, which last year alone, I'm proud to say, had over 100,000 students, primarily elementary, wear their pajamas and fundraise for CHOP. Truly the spirit of kids helping kids, which to me is like remarkable. And to be able to go into those schools and see all those kids wearing their pajamas and giving their quarters, their dollars, the online fundraising page that their parents give to, and to be able to see the students raise their hand and say, I was born at CHOP, I was born in the NICU, or my brother has asthma. It's just really remarkable. And then our team is primarily the team that, I am, really privileged and honored to manage, is made up of about 10 FTEs. And this year we're projected to raise approximately right around 8 million, or give or take.
That's fantastic. And it's such a well-rounded peer-to-peer portfolio, which I think for so many organizations, that was kind of the next step of peer-to-peer, right? They maybe had one thing and then it's expanding. And I think what we're about to talk about, and I'm excited about, is kind of how we're thinking even beyond that. So, those of us in the peer-to-peer world, there's a lot of metrics that we use to talk about how we measure our success. So average raise per fundraiser, fundraiser activation rate, retention, cost per dollar raised. But y'all are starting to look more at the lifetime value of your peer-to-peer supporters. So I would like to hear, how did that conversation start around evaluating your peer-to-peer programs a little bit through this lens, as opposed to just all of those other metrics?
So I'm happy to take a first crack at this, and then, John, please weigh in. But I mean, I think there's a couple of core fundamental components here. So really, we are truly a data-driven team that I'd say we're ego-free is probably the best way to think of it. Ultimately, what we're just trying to do is provide the best care in the best possible ways for the incredible patient families, that are seen in the hospital. Our job is fundraisers, and we wear that proudly, whether that's frontline or, operational. But, I think it's actually important to kind of start back, because we do all of the different KPIs that, Marcy, that you just mentioned. But truthfully, peer-to-peer events aren't just about raising annual funds. I mentioned that we're raising about 8 million. It's funny that I mentioned that. But truthfully, what we're all about is creating experiences that hit home to participants. It's not about the money. It's really about the community. So, take our event, Philly Spin-In, for example. People don't just come back year after year after year because they love indoor cycling. In fact, the majority of them don't have any previous experience riding a bike. They truly come because they feel like they're part of a community. They feel like there's something bigger than themselves, which really helps them come back year over year, and it helps that retention. So, when you mention cost per dollar raised, oftentimes in this space, we often use that as a vehicle to evaluate the
I think
success of our
you hit it
events.
right on the
But
head.
truthfully, if we're
If I
only
was going
looking
to
at
add anything to
revenue
it, is that
divided
we
by
also
costs,
happen to have like
we're
this
kind of
perfect
missing the
storm of
forest through the trees
conversations
there.
that
So
helped us get
our
here.
objective,
One,
truthfully,
as Kevin
on the
alluded,
peer-to-peer team is
this
to really
team
lead
is
with that
incredibly
community
humble. And
building
when you've got
aspect,
a humble
which is
team to
kind
work
of
with,
how
you
we've
can
gotten
ask
down
the
this,
harder questions
lifetime
that
value
everybody
path.
else is
So,
afraid to
John,
ask.
please feel free to
In
add in
parallel
things
to
that I'm
that,
missing here.
and it has nothing to do with P2P, I feel like every year in my career, I get summoned to a meeting with an executive leadership who are looking at some balance statement saying, well, what is the ROI of events, P2P, and direct response? It doesn't look good in relationship to the ROI of a gift officer. And of course, we know anecdotally that they're missing the conversation when they ask that because they're too focused in on what is that cost per dollar raise. So we had to be able to have a more educated conversation about what is the value of these programs. And so we set out to do engagement scoring or donor state modeling that helped us calculate out what was the true return on investment of these programs. How did it fit in? And part of what was going on in this question was, how did we need to grow or change our staffing models? Because part of the question was we were going into this campaign, we were asked, how many more staff do we need? And part of doing that is figuring out, well, what is your pipeline? So in that process of doing this donor state modeling, we started going back and forth between our what we call our small sum programs. Think of anything that's giving less than $10,000 a year, which P2P events and direct response largely make up. And we started to pull a couple of trends. One of the things that we noticed was that 4 out of 10 of our $1 million donors start off giving us $100 or less. That was a really incredible, empowering kind of thing, is saying that the acquisition of major giving is not qualification in the major giving program. It's actually all of these other programs. They bear the brunt of that recruitment, of that stewardship to set them up for that next giving level. The second thing that we noticed was that if somebody started off in a program like direct response and we had them participate in the normal way that was tend to be siloed inside that program, because who direct response acquires, that's got to stay with direct response. It can't be P2Ps. And likewise, whoever P2P requires, nobody else can share that. So we broke down those silos and we said, if we broke those silos down and we moved a donor from one program over to P2P and had them participate in just one event, and then we moved them back to the program that they joined, that single action doubled their lifetime value. Well, that really opened up a conversation about that for a foundation to be worth more than the sum of its parts. All of those silos have to go away. We have to stop setting up our structure, our processes, our rules around how the foundation would like to organize itself, and start building it around how do you have a constituent first or operation, or if we are optimizing things for what is the best path of our donors. And so from that, we were actually really able to radically change the conversation about what P2P is. And after all of that analysis, we've decided that P2P's single greatest value is that it changes the psychology in our donors. It changes the way that they are attached to our cause and to our mission. It is the catalyst for changing lifetime value. So its ROI has nothing to do with the direct dollars that it brings in, and everything to do with how it sets that person up for other programs to have success. In other words, I see P2P as the Scottie Pippen.
Kevin, how did you react when John kind of brought some of these data points to you?
I mean, it wasn't as linear as you think. It was a number of different conversations of just like kicking them tires on, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And that's how truly our relationship is between the two of us and many of our colleagues within the foundation. It's not as, hey, here's this data point and we want to be able to think about this differently. It's really been, years of these different ongoing conversations and saying, how can we think differently about the work that we're doing ultimately, right? Like, and if someone listening is, the key takeaway that I would say is, whether we're talking about lifetime value or something else, truthfully, it's just about looking at where's the industry going, where's your program at in this current state, and how can we think about doing things differently? And truthfully, that's been the kind of aha moment. And lifetime value has just been an outcome of many of those different conversations.
What I think I like about this conversation so much is we've always said peer-to-peer is all about the community. It's never been about the event. It's about the relationship. It's about how you're bringing people into the organization. But it is really hard to measure that, right? In a very metrics-driven organization. And when everything else, to your point, how you staff, how you invest is based on data points. So being able to have that number or that kind of trying to draw an even playing field, right, with other development initiatives to say, this is why we should invest in X, Y, Z. I think that's what I find so important, because I think a lot of us have said, we know the value of this. We just don't know the dollar value of the community and the experience and the relationships that we're building. So I love that. So, as you're looking through this, looking at your peer-to-peer through the lens of lifetime value, it's not just a strategic shift, it's a philosophical one for the organization. So how has this impacted how your teams work together, how you set goals, how you set budgets, what are some of the kind of strategic changes you've made and what have been their outcomes?
Well, I actually kind of want to step back a little bit and pull on something that Kevin said a little bit earlier, that he was looking at the state of the industry. I'm a really big fan of the book, The Generosity Crisis by Grimes and Chappell. And I think one of the things that it's really calling out is that the state of the industry is not as strong as the rest of us would like. That while the amount of dollars are participating in philanthropy are higher than ever, the amount of individuals is rapidly declining. And so what's good and bad about that is when you see that your industry that you care about so much is at this existential crisis point, it actually is empowering you to be bold. And so part of this conversation to tee up to go into your question is, we know that the status quo isn't going to keep working for us. We know that we have to be bolder. We know that we have to have bigger risks. There is no amount of risk mitigation that is actually going to give us a stable foundation 10, 15 years from now. So with that in mind, how do we go about breaking down those silos, making that conversation? So what we did with that is we first went back to that constituent first mindset. And we said, you know what? Oftentimes we tend to work with consultants in vacuums. There's a consultant in our case, we had one shop doing direct response online versus a different shop doing direct response offline, versus some P2Ps had different consultants or none whatsoever. We unified all of that with plan giving. And we said, inside all of the events, all of planned, direct response on and offline, and annual giving, we're going to have one vendor look at it holistically. They're going to look at it as a journey map or a choose your own adventure book that we can move people through to build that greatest lifetime value. The second thing that we're going to do is we're not going to hold that vendor accountable for cost per dollar raised. We're actually telling that vendor it is okay to raise less, to do something less, if it stimulates a greater return on investment for the foundation over a period of time. That is really hard to pull off.
No kidding.
And to set up. But it's all about that you have to recognize that the foundation is worth more than the sum of its parts. And if that role of P2P is all about changing psychology, you have to double down that you are okay with P2P raising a little less to set up another program to raise more. And that does not mean P2P is less successful. In fact, it means that they're more successful and they're a better teammate than ever before. So for us to do that from a budgetary standpoint, that was hard. We had lots going into that. One is we looked at the budget of the apparatus altogether so that it was constituent first. It wasn't programmatic first. The second thing that we did is we obviously have to match back, well, what are the costs of touch points? So if you think about direct mail, it's a program, but it's also a channel, right? That channel as the mail pieces can be used for multiple programs. So we had to break down that silo so that we're using all of those channels. Mail is one, but all those digitals equally as much for these programs, such as an event, so on and so forth. So that already changes the calculus of the money spent. So then we had to figure out, well, how do we figure out the money back in? And we went at that from a couple different angles. One is we built a quant modeling shop, which if anybody knows what that is, just me saying that, they should just look me up on LinkedIn and we should talk about how they should join CHOP. But for like the friends of like the TV show Billions or people who are Wall Street nerds, so much of what happens on Wall Street these days, it's computer models doing dynamic trading around really quickly. CHOP actually built a version of this. We are looking at all these macro and microeconomic indicators to see how does the economy affect our business. One of the things that is really simple to say is most foundations actually have a really tight correlation between the S&P 500 and fundraising performance. But we went to the next step further and we broke the foundation down into 4 big segments. We have IEF, which is our kind of our corporate and our foundations. We have mass, which is everything that we've been talking about today. Plans, which is a little separate, and then niche giving or major giving. We found when we studied all of the foundation that those 4 big chunks tend to behave independently of each other. I think a simple way of thinking about it is those who derive their income from investments behave differently than those who derive their income from their labor. In fact, those who derive their income from their labor, while they tend to give less than investments, tend to be more steady about it. They're more deeply connected because they don't have the super high peaks and lows of those who are swinging with the market. And so we do all of that to say that based upon whatever is going on in the world, we can pull back from one set of a program and lean into other sets of programs. So based upon everything that we see in the market right now, we actually know that P2P is our strength. It's providing the steadiness for our foundation. And so when we then go look at our modeling that we have built to talk about who gets exposed to what, one of the first places we start with is what programs will provide the best experience in this economy, and we'll lay off those others. So then how do we get to that next layer on it? And this starts getting really geeky because that, of course, wasn't geeky enough for you, right?
I was about to say, John, that was geeky enough already. I love it.
So we have a suite of AI systems. There's some that sit on Epic, which is our medical CRM, some that sit on entirely other things, and some just sit on the foundation. And it's all about measuring attachment. How are you attached to CHOP as a cause? We're looking at like how far do you drive in to get treatment? What is the clinical mix? Are you driving past our competitors? So on and so forth. It gives us kind of this idea that you are really attached to us as a grateful family. But actually, the vast majority of our donors aren't even on that side of our world. They're attached to CHOP for other reasons. And so we also have to look at how long have you been on the foundation file? Have you been interacting with multiple programs? Has your giving been going up or down, or is it steady? Or what about the people around you? And so all of that helps us steward somebody through this relationship because we know how attached they are. Now, what I often talk about is that I was watching DuckTales with my daughter Lake, and Scrooge McDuck got hit by a car. And it dawned on me that Scrooge McDuck passes the historical wealth screening test and the attachment test, but he's still a jerk. He's not going to give. And so we had to come up with a way to account for psychology. Are you psychologically the type of person who will get philanthropically engaged? So we broke that out by program because we know that the type of person who gives online is not the same type of person who gives offline. It's not the same type of person who is the team captain or the team participant, so on and so forth. So we had to create dozens of these models based upon programs. And we look at the intersection between the big data, all of the AI attachment scores, and then the wealth. And we derive all of our pipeline and assignments out from that dynamically, which is really great. Maybe a more simple way of saying that is 4 years ago, nearly everybody in the industry based segmentation and outreach around recency, frequency, and money. And now we base our segmentation and outreach based upon psychology, attachment, and interest. It's that constituent first view set.
That's a really amazing way to look at things. I mean, I'm really kind of it's sending me in a lot of different ways of other questions I want to ask you. But Kevin, how has this impacted, how you manage your team and your big peer-to-peer events? So, you've got a staff that has, you want to hit that big goal for your big event, because there's a psychology to, achieving a goal for both staff and participants. So how has this outlook impacted kind of how you are managing your big peer-to-peer events and your staff and the experience and the messaging, and kind of what does all that sound like to you?
No, one of my favorite things about working at CHOP is being able to work with people that are smarter than me, whether that be clinically or within the foundation. And I think John is a great example of that, right? Of just everyone is just trying to do better, and we just want to make big bigger. Ultimately, like that's our goal, and we all have our specialized skill sets. And I think that's really the secret sauce of what we do as a foundation, but also clinically, what we are. Because in many ways, I feel like we mirror the subspecialties that exist within the hospital. So to answer your question, to go to a team and say, hey, listen, we may not raise as much, but it's going to be better because we're Scottie Pippen, essentially, is one thing. Those things also don't have to be mutually exclusive either, right? So we can be Scottie Pippen and also, be an MVP at the same exact time by continuing to raise more annual funds. The biggest thing of what John was saying was it's not necessarily, if you decrease, it's not going to be the end all be all in annual funding, because your real main purpose that you serve is being able to create the community and belonging that really help with retention. Because basically there's like two ways to get at LTV, right? So you can either get people to give more or stick around longer. It's really is the way that I think of it. And like, what's the secret sauce there? Happy donors, right? Like experience. So we used to be in this proverbial ask cycle and never really stewarding our donors. So what we really needed to do was take a giant step back and look at their experience as a really holistic unit. Not only the experience that they're receiving on event day, but what are the other touch points that they're receiving throughout the year, right? Because ultimately that's going to keep grateful patient families seen at CHOP in the larger CHOP family, right? I literally have it hanging on my wall. We want to keep CHOP families in the CHOP family. And the only way to be able to do that is through providing remarkable experience, remarkable service, making our donors happy, forming authentic relationships. And all of those things that I'm just rattling off right now are really the secret sauce of what are keeping donors happy and therefore increasing their lifetime value. So like that's the main role that we play here, is just like creating community and belonging. I've said it 3 times. I'll say it a fourth. Like that's really the goal here. And I think if we look through that lens of every single event of how are we creating community and belonging, and if at the end of the event, we can check those boxes, but raise less, then we've still done our job.
Well, and I think putting it in peer-to-peer terms, we always have said a participant who returns year after year or a team that comes back year after year is always going to raise more money. And I feel like we never really talked about the why behind that. Yes, they're more familiar with the tools. They kind of know what they're doing after year one. Maybe they're more excited, more motivated. But at the end of the day, it's because they feel like they belong. It's the fact that they feel like they're a part of the community. And so there is a reason why that statistic has always been important. It wasn't just a statistic to look at. There was a reason why we knew that happened. And, everything you're saying about just the silos between the teams. I mean, I know I have worked places where people clearly understood that people who came in through events and peer-to-peer were your next, individual donor, major donor, planned giver. And I've worked at places that said event donors will never, ever give again. So don't waste your time. So I think I've always been of the former, not of the latter, of knowing that there is this possibility to engage people beyond just peer-to-peer, or to just deepen their engagement with peer-to-peer. So, John, this is all really exciting. I know you said y'all are kind of new. This is still something new at CHOP. Like, what does the future look like for how y'all are continuing to kind of look at your data this way? What's the future of these metrics?
Well, there's two parts to that. One is what is our success thus far? And so this approach we've been testing into. And I've yet to meet the chief development officer who lets you experiment on the major and principal gift team. So we have to run the bulk of the tests with our programs. And we started off with direct response, and we saw an 85% increase in response rate there with a 25% increase in average gift size. It was gigantic. And from that, we were then able to test this approach of how are we building pipeline, utilizing this methodology for major and principal. And we saw those donors go through moves management about 17% faster with a 23% higher average gift size. So we're seeing this explosive success. And at the same notion, I was working with Kevin on an event like 8 months ago. And we actually were seeing dismal success with some of the segmentation. It actually required some Socratic dialogue. So part of the first thing that we have to call out is what is the future is. The future is practicing with this questioning attitude, not just over-reliance on models. And so we actually had to work together to rebuild a bunch of models and approaches that started testing better for his effort. And in fact, Kevin doesn't even know this yet, so I'm going to tell him, I guess, on the first time this call. But
Live announcement.
Yeah, the first time that we did some of these models, we were pulling down 4,000 data points against every adult in this country. So 250 million people to create some of the lookalikes. Kevin, your latest models are looking at 50,000 data points per every adult in this country. I mean, the level of sophistication that is still being built to make this work it's incredible. It's mind blowing, but it's all for naught without that constant back and forth and validation. So then where are we taking it from now? Well, one is that where we're at with lifetime value metrics, we're at this really simple calculation that essentially is adding up everything somebody has donated up to this point. It's not a predictive score in the way that we need it to be. And so what are we working on is getting to that predictive layer. To do that, we first have to be able to come up with better ways of calculating the value of somebody who fundraises for us, but does not necessarily directly give. That's actually kind of hard to calculate in the back end, even though that's as simply said, even with the vast troves of data that we have. Doing so that links all of the other predictive AI systems that we have so that we know that if this person exhibits this behavior or we get them to do this in an event, this is the ripple effect 5-10 years out from now. We're right now really looking about a year out, and we need to get 5 or more because, again, we care more about the sum of the foundation rather than its parts. And so we have all of this work to go do, but we're in this place where we feel like we also have the wind at our back, that we're really onto something. And what is needed to get there, besides just time, is this continued partnership. Because without that validation and pushback, we might just be spinning around in circles. And so really having that equal partner who says, you know what, I know that we're okay raising a little less, but this actually is funky less in our data. Let's go validate that. Let's actually see what we're seeing is what we meant to do. And without that, there is no future.
So I imagine there are many people at home listening and who are thinking, this sounds great, right? This is amazing. I agree. This is what we should be doing, but they don't quite know where to start, right? If this is not something their organization is currently doing, if they don't have that strong partnership across teams, what would be your advice on how someone can start digging into their data to understand the current lifetime value of their peer-to-peer supporters, as well as how to impact that?
So, I mean, where to start, I think, is kind of where I said in the very beginning. Listen, if you have a team that has cultural barriers in place, and is not open to being able to say, oh, these are my donors, right? If it's a hard place to go from that conversation to the conversation that we're having right now with that mindset, right? They're not the event donors. They're the hospital donors, right? They're giving, because they care, because they believe in what we're doing, right? So I think like in a non-technical fashion, John will be able to give the technical answer here. I'll be able to give the kind of the heart answer. It's really being able to understand your event and the program and the community that you're creating is so much more than what you may realize. You may not realize that 80-year-old grandmother that's attending your event for the first time that may look like a budgetary drag on your organization because it's barely breaking even, will eventually or could leave a gift to them, right? There could be an estate gift that's associated with it that you would have no oversight on, right? That will pay itself off in many years to come potentially. But if you don't look at it through the lens of, hey, I'm only looking out for me, myself, and I here, then you're kind of almost dead in the water, I'd say. And you can't even begin to have the conversation before you have a group of leaders that understand and realize, listen, this is more than just us. This is about the hospital and the patients that we're really treating and seeing right now. John, I'm sure you'll have a much more technical answer to start in, but I think that's the baseline approach of where we need to be.
I think you're right. I think the hard work is the culture. Technology can be easy. I actually think that most nonprofits, regardless of their size, probably have at least one, if not a couple meetings every year with their executive leadership team where they present the results of what did we do at this gala or this event. Use that to change the script. You're actually reinforcing the cost per dollar or the ROI in those decks that I've always seen. Instead, start finding a few people that who might be interacting elsewhere in the foundation, pull their donor profile, tell their story from the constituent first point of view to your leadership team and say, we want to pull the thread on this because we know that the foundation is worth more than the sum of their parts. Your leadership team will be all about that. They are waiting for that moment to break out of those silos. So paint that path for them. How to do the data analysis. There actually are other nonprofits who donate data scientist time to other nonprofits. So you can go look for that if you need external help. If you can do it in-house, ask yourself to measure how are your people how are your donors attached to you, your mission, your program, so on and so forth. How is that intertwined? If you can start framing everything from a constituent first point of view, rather than how your foundation is organized and the way the business is running your foundation, then you're going to start finding a whole lot of aha moments that are going to then empower you to break down the silos.
Well, I know I shared this kind of fun fact when we spoke earlier in preparation for this conversation, but I can speak to an example of that in my career, having launched a walk program at an organization that was a very successful organization. And, the walk was growing. It was solid, kind of just getting its start. But then we had that peer over on in the larger development team that took a look at it and said, yes, the walk is raising X, but the amount of people who are coming in the door through that, who are giving subsequent gifts in the next 18 months is almost double what the walk itself is raising. And I think that is one of the things that kind of got leadership's attention to say, okay, if this is what this is doing when the walk is this size, imagine what it would do if we invested in it and how this is going to impact the organization. And so I think I agree with you that it's having to change the narrative, right? If it's just talking about what did we raise today, how many people showed up today, as opposed to kind of that longer vision, I think that's really key. So I imagine there are people listening who might be really inspired to participate in a CHOP event. They might be inspired to come work for CHOP, to your question. So Kevin, how can people get involved? Where can they learn more?
Yeah, so great question. And thank you so much for having us today. So to learn a little bit more about the work that's taking place at CHOP, You can either follow John or I on LinkedIn. You can go to our website, giving.chop.edu. You follow our social handles, which is at Children's Phila, because at Chop, unfortunately, was taken many years ago. So yeah, there's lots of different ways to plug in. And, right now we're actually about to embark on our virtual 31-day challenge, which starts on May 1st. So if someone is motivated, inspired, and has their own Chop story and you're listening and you want to give back, you can participate from anywhere in the country. So this is a shameless plug to go check out the Chop 31-day challenge, which starts on May 1st. So lots of different ways to plug in here.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all both so much. I think this has definitely helped a lot of us kind of elevate our conversation about peer-to-peer. And so I imagine there might be some of our typical listeners who are forwarding this on to their chief development officer or to somebody in their organization who leads up kind of the outside of the peer-to-peer world fundraising efforts. So thank y'all so much for help just bringing this conversation to light and sharing what y'all are doing, all the great work you're doing at CHOP.
Thanks, Marcy.
Thank you.
The P2P Soap Box is produced in partnership with True Story FM. Engineering by Pete Wright. Music this week is by Aves. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we hope you'll consider doing just that for our show. But the best thing that you can do to support the P2P Soap Box is simply to share the show with a friend or colleague. Thank you for listening.